Okay, we want to take a look at Hyper-V virtual networking. So here we can see the Hyper-V manager, and over in the actions pane, we have the virtual network manager. So we'll click on virtual network manager. We see that brings up the virtual network manager page or dialog box. And here we have an opportunity of viewing currently existing virtual networks, and we can also create new virtual networks. On this machine, there's a number of virtual networks that have been created already. This machine hosts the base configuration and a number of test lab guide test labs that use virtual networks in order to create the segmentation that we were talking about in the document. So on this virtual machine, we have a private one, which is a private network, and I talked about how the private networks isolate virtual machines from both the host and a production network, but allow the virtual machines on the same private network to talk to each other and communicate with each other. So we have a private one, which I've assigned to the CorpNet subnet, a private 2, which I've assigned to the internet subnet, and a private 3, which I've assigned to the HomeNet subnet. Now remember, the HomeNet subnet is not part of the base configuration, but since I do mainly direct access work, we're always using the HomeNet subnet in that scenario. Now keep in mind that each of these networks are essentially virtual switches, and so all the virtual machines that you connect to the same virtual network are essentially on the same Ethernet segment as I wrote about in the document, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. If you put hosts that are in different IP subnets on the same virtual network, you can sort of create a segmented network, but I have found, especially if you're dealing with multi-networking scenarios, that if you put all the same subnets on the same Ethernet broadcast domain, you can run into very subtle and strange problems, especially if you're using firewalls like TMG or ISA. So I prefer just to create a virtual network. It's not a lot of work to do that, and I'll show you how to do that right now. So here in the virtual networks on the left side of the dialog box, we click on New Virtual Network. And then here where it says what type of virtual network do you want to create, we have the three options I talked about in the document. The external virtual network that is assigned to a physical NIC and allows connectivity to a live network. An internal virtual network where all the hosts that are connected to the same internal virtual network are able to communicate with one another and also with the host operating system, or what we sometimes call the parent operating system. And then the private virtual network, where all the virtual machines that are connected to the same private virtual network are able to communicate with one another, but are not able to communicate with the host operating system or the external live network. Now let's say we wanted to create a new private network. All we have to do is click the add button here, and let's say that we want to create a new private network for the Fabricam network. So what we could do is, rather than calling them private 1, 2, and 3 like I did, which might make it a little confusing for other people who might want to use this virtual server, I could call this Fabricam. And I could put a note here that says Fabricam private network, just to make it clear that this is a private network and that all the machines are able to communicate with each other on this private network, but not to any external resources and not into the host OS. Then we select here private virtual network. Notice if we wanted to make this an external network, we would select which physical NIC we want to associate with the external network, because the physical NICs may be connected directly to the internet, or they may be connected to a DMZ segment, or they may be connected to various segments on your internal or production network. So you need to be thoughtful and careful when you're creating an external network, because you don't want to make a mistake there. So we want to create a private virtual network. Our VLAN options are not available because we're not connecting to the actual physical NIC for this, and so VLAN IDs aren't really applicable. So we click Apply, and bam, our new Fabricam network shows up here, and now we can start connecting virtual machines to that network. Go ahead and click OK. Now to connect a client to a network, it's very easy, and often you're going to want to move clients around different virtual networks. So to do that, all we need to do is right click on the client that we're interested in and click Settings, or we can, if we're in the client itself, we can open the client window and click File and click Settings. So there's two ways to do that. And then we click on the network adapter, and we can see right now that client 1 is connected to the private network 3. If we want to move it to, say, the private network 1, we just select from the network drop-down list, select private 1, click OK, and then if this client were running, we would see the network status indicator icon spin for a second, and then after the spinning it would show that it was connected, because in most cases the mobile client 1 will be using DHCP. So that is a short course on virtual networking with Hyper-V.